how to create user interface programmatically, meaning using code instead of nib files, storyboards. Just create an instance of a label, set some properties, writing Objective-C code, and create the view, the buttons, the labels. Now, why would you want to do that? Storyboards are very nice, and that's true. They make it easy for a novice who does not know Objective-C to create user interface. But in some cases, the programmers is the same guy creating the user interface. And there are a list of cons of using nib files and storyboards. One of them is when you might as well be writing code, right? And if you're writing a user interface that is very dynamic, it's data driven, then programming would be more flexible. Storyboards don't work with the version control. Storyboards may make it difficult to work in a team. They disrupt the flow of programming. Let's say you are creating a user interface. Now you gotta jump to the nib files to create it. Now you gotta jump back to the code. As you see in previous tutorials, there are jumping around. This sacrifice flexibility for control and ease of use. Storyboards are easy to use. Coding gives you more flexibility. Storyboards always create new instances of the view controller, whereas in programming you could create it once and then store it. So in this tutorial, that's what I'm going to look at. So I'll start out by creating a simple program which will just have a label, and it'll have a button. When I click on a button, there will be an action that throws up a UI view controller, I mean an alert box, and it also changes the label. And I'll move into more complex examples of creating a table view controller and creating a dynamic table, then a static table, using only programs, Objective-C code. So I'm going to start out by creating a single view application. I'm going to call it, give it a name. Only select iPhone because I'll be handling everything programmatically. No storyboards. Click next. Now that'll give me a nib file which we don't need. I'm going to move it to trash. I'm going to open up the view controller, assistant editor. I'm going to open the app delegate. So now I don't need this anymore because usually it goes with the nib file, so I can see more of the code. Now in here there's some code right here. Self window, we're going to leave it alone. Self view controller is we are creating alloc view controller alloc init with nib name view controller, so that needs to be changed. So now I'm going to make some changes. Okay, so what I need to do here is then I'm going to run this out with the nib file and all that stuff, and just go with self view controller is equal to view controller alloc init. That's it, no nib file. And that's all I did in here. Now I'm going to jump into the view controller, and that's the only thing I need. I don't need a nib file. And now in the view controller.m, all I need to do is I need a label and I need a button. So I'm going to create a property strong non-atomic UI label, no IB outlet now, call my label a button, call my button. In the .m file, I'm going to synthesize So this is the .m file. I'm going to synthesize my label and my button. Then I'm going to jump into view did load and create an instance of UI view alloc init with frame UI screen application frame. Set its background to white and self.view property set that to the view I just created above. So now a view has been created, a blank canvas for me to work on. I'm going to take my label from up there and there. UI label alloc init with frame. I'm creating a rectangle area that it'll appear in, setting its text property and other properties. And very important, self view add subview my label. It will not show up unless I do this line. Same thing with the button. Create an instance of that button. What type it is, very important. UI button, round, rectangle type, or there are other kinds here. Its dimensions, its title, and very important, my button add target self. This file action will have a method called on show info, and when will it fire? On control events, UI control event touch up inside. When I click on the button, call this method, and that method I'm going to define right there. Down below I have to do that. Self.view add subview my button, just like the one above. Now in the on show info, I show an alert box, change the text of my label, and show that alert box. And this is the example, very simple example. As you saw, no more IB actions, no more IB outlets, just code, a little bit more code. Looks intimidating, but even that can be automated, and by the time this simulator comes up, this code could be moved into a method, right? Another methods can create my controls. So keep the view did load clean. Here we go. You see the label changes and an alert box, totally programmatically, no nib file, no storyboards. Now I'm going to jump into more complicated examples, like creating the table view. Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna move this into a method, start moving these things into method. There could be a method to create label file, a standard label file where the text changes but the rest of the properties stay the same, so we can control all the labels be the blue color. Now I'm gonna start working on the table view controller. So first of all, what I need is add a file, add a view controller. I'm gonna call it my table view controller, and it's going to inherit from UI table view controller. My table view controller inherits from UI table view controller. Uncheck, uncheck. There we go. So in here, my table view controller inherits from UI table view controller, and I have, you see, some of the methods that are already in there. A stub, number of sections in this table, number of rows in section, cell for row at index. Now these are some of the ones. Did select row at index, and there are other methods when we enable editing and all that stuff. The other thing that I want to do over here is I want to go in here and tell it that there's going to be a class my table view controller, and I want to import. Just follow the same pattern, my table view controller, and instead of, I'm going to run this out, and instead I'm going to create an instance of the table view controller. View controller is, actually I need to come back in here. I'm gonna create my table view controller, then another instance of the my table view controller. I don't think I need to. So now I could do this. I change this here to from view controller to my self.myTableViewController is my table view controller alloc in it, and self window root view controller is self view controller. And we're gonna run this and see if that'll at least start without giving any problems. Yep, application windows are expected to have a root view controller at the end of the application. Okay, it should be this one. My table view controller. I gotta change that all over the place. There we go. We got a blank table working here. And another thing I did was remove that semicolon and change this to my table view controller here, 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 and uncomment that out. So after these number of steps, we are on our way. So if I was to come in here, I'm going to stop working with the view controller, my table view controller. If I say view did load, I'm going to have to do some things in here. And sure enough, it's going to fire. I'm going to set some properties of this table view controller, the title, the buttons, and the data source from now on. In order for the navigation bar to show up, I'm going to create another property called navigation controller, UI navigation controller, called star navigation controller. Don't need to synthesize it. Then on the other hand, I need to get rid of that. I'm going to make some change. Same thing, self my table view controller is a new instance of my table view controller alloc init. Then I'm going to go backwards I'm going to take that self my table view controller. I'm going to use it in the init root view controller of a navigation view controller. And I'm going to set that to self.navigation view controller property. This line I found out has no impact, so I'm going to delete that. Now self window root view controller is self navigation controller as opposed to directly my table view controller. Make visible is in there twice, so I'm going to get rid of that. Now on the other hand, in the table view, my table view controller, I'm going to go into view did load and self.title equal to title, and self navigation item dot left bar button item is self dot edit item. That should do this. It's going to add that edit item. Title will set that as a title. Of course, it doesn't do any functionality yet, but I have a table view with a title now, navigation bar. Its title is set, and I have a button on the title. Now at this point, I have implemented some data arrays to be bound to the table. For that, in the header file, I declared an NS array called data array, synthesize it, initialize it with 5 elements, and started to implement number of sections in table, just one, number of rows in section data array, count how many elements are in data array. There's the number of rows we got. Then I'm going to close this. Create a UI table cell based on init with this style and reuse identifier as UI table view cell. Then I'll just reuse the cells as they scroll up as opposed to creating new ones. Memory efficient. And this integer row is index. We send a message to it row, and that's a parameter to this method, and that returns the row number. Then cell text label set text data array object at index row. Basically it goes back to this index path variable. So at this point it should be ready to display all these 5 elements in the array as simple as possible. No nib files or storyboard so far. So I want to display demonstrate what goes on behind the scene at this moment. I'm going to set some breakpoints in these methods and I'm going to run this application. Okay, so at the very first data array is initialized. Then it calls number of sections, how many sections there are in the table, and I've hard-coded just one. So now it's going to call number of rows in section that many times, just one time. Let's see. So it calls that method again. It's doing another calculation. Now it's going to call it number of rows in section one time and 5 objects. So it called it twice. There are a number of calculations going on, one for display initial at different stages. So now it's going to call cell for row at index 5 times, the return of this number of rows in section table. So one time, second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, and then 7, 8, 9, 10. I think it called it 10 times because again it calls it double the number of times. Actually, if you see, if I have 5 rows, it'll call it 10 times. 5 for one operations, 5 again for one operations, which is a little bit confusing, but don't let it confuse you. Let's do it again. Okay, we already know that's called once. Number of rows in section is called twice. Number of rows in section is called twice. Now here we are. Cells for row at index. And at this point, row is 0. Row is 0. I think my breakpoint's a little bit confused. Here, row is 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 times, 0 based index. So it called it 5 times actually, that was correct. Now 10 times, once for each element in the row. So that's how these three methods coordinate with each other to figure out how many cells, how many rows in each, how many sections, how many rows in each section. Then for each section, call cell for row at index, giving it, what for that particular section, give me the number of rows, and I gotta have logic to provide information back to it. It's not going to do it automatically, but if you're working with arrays, that's the basic logic you can repeat. But the other elements that I have used instead of array and as mutable dictionaries I have used, and probably in the future I'll show an example. Point over there, I'm going to start making more additions to this program. When I click on any one of these rows, I want to go to a detailed view. Click on the title, it comes back. Click here, it goes there, it says hello programmatically. Click me, just like the very first example I did. I'm gonna click on it. It says totally dynamic, hello very programmatic, just like before. I click on the title, click on 4, it comes back to the detail view, but now if you notice, it still says hello very programmatic, as opposed to the very first time that it said. At the very first time it said hello programmatically, and then when I click on it, it says hello very programmatic. So that is one thing that you gotta keep in mind. Second time around, view did load is not firing, so it's holding its state. So if I run this again, 2, hello programmatically, hello very programmatically, click back, click on any one of them, still says hello very programmatic, holding its state. So now, and the way is being done is that in the my view controller, I declare a property. I created a new class, my detail view controller.m, which is very similar to view controller that you have seen before. And in my view controller, I declare a property of that type, import my detail view controller h file, then did select row at index. I check to see if I have already initialized it. If not, I initial alloc init it. Self navigation controller push view controller self.my detail view controller animated yes. That's all I have to do. And that takes me over to the my detail view controller, and its internals are very similar to view controller.m that I have explained before. Now one more thing that I'm going to do here is, before I push it, I'm going to say self dot my detail view controller dot my label dot text, and I'm going to set it to the selected rows value. And what I did was that I'm going to follow the same technique, ns integer row. It'll tell me which row number I am at, 0 1 2 3, and I'm going to go self my detail view controller dot my label dot text equal to data array object at index row, and I'm going to run this example. I'm going to click on 1. You see, it still says hello programmatically. Next time I'm going to click on 1 again. Now it says 1. I'm going to go back again there, 2. Now it says 2. Now why this happened? Previously I said that very first time in the my detail view controller, the view did load method runs, and the second time it does not. So the very first time the text is hello programmatically. So I'm going to change that. It should be I'm going to try this, my label dot text. I think it doesn't even exist. So I'm going to have to think about a way this doesn't work. 1, nothing. Second time it is something. So it doesn't exist the very first time. So I'm going to have to move this code somewhere else. View did load isn't a good place for it. I am going to make an init method and put all that code in there so it's available at init time. working perfectly. 1. I selected 2. Of course, it's not going to be as simplistic. It's going to be more than that. You want to, if 2 was selected, you want to display a whole detail about it. But you can transfer an example how you can cart over the value selected over to another page. So a working example of a table view of a fair complexity without any nib or storyboard, just program.